For those of us you just joining us, we are here with author Jason Pinter for our next edition of the virtual speaker series. Jason is Xi, graduated in 03, if I have that right.
Yep, that's right.
From Wesleyan. He is the owner of Polis Books Publishing and a best-selling author. He produces both digital and print editions, founded Polis in 2013. One of their imprints is Agora, which aims to amplify diverse voices in crime fiction. I believe they launched last year. He's the author of 7 novels and 2 children's books.
2 children's books. Maybe a third is in the works at some point, but only 2 so far.
Okay. Nominated for the Thrill Award, Strand Critics Award, Barry Awards, Shamus, and more. As a brief bit of housekeeping, the Psi Upsilon speaker series and virtual speaker series aims to strengthen bonds between brothers of all generations by connecting people of different, with others in their regions, professions, and interests. Your donations to the Psi Upsilon Foundation help our programs and outreach, education, and grants like this. If you'd like to, we have recently added a text to give program. You can do that by texting give to 317-399-4318. And that's a word from our sponsor. So now we're going to go turn things over to Jason. Give me just a moment. Brief bit of housekeeping. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Q&A is questions and answers. We aim for moderated conversational tone, so type your questions as they have, but they will not necessarily be answered in order, and they might be rolled into a different question than I asked Jason. We've already done add chapter and year if you are so inclined. Jason, if you don't mind, you've moved from editor to author to publisher. Would you tell us a little bit about your career and how that transition happened?
Yeah, so I started out working in publishing. It was my first job out of college. I was an English major at Wesleyan. My first job was as an editorial assistant at Warner Books, which actually doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by Hachette Livre in France and is now Grand Central Publishing. But I was an editorial assistant there, moved up the ranks a little bit, took editorial jobs at a Random House in St. Martin's Press. And in the midst of there, I wrote couple of my own books, and the Henry Parker thriller series, the first book of which was The Mark. I wrote 4 more in that series while I was still working in editing. Then I took a post at Grove Atlantic, helping to relaunch the Mysterious Press there. Left Grove Atlantic in 2013 to found Polis Books, which again, is now in business for, going to our 7th year in business. We've published somewhere in the vicinity of 150 books so far. We just launched our first new imprint last fall called Agora, which you mentioned. Yeah, and I love being on both sides of the desk, essentially, both publishing books and writing my own. And the first book in my new Rachel Marin series, Hideaway, just came out in March. Certainly an interesting time to be launching a book, given that the world shut down. I literally had my book tour canceled mid-tour. I was out in San Diego for a conference, and the conference shut down the day it was supposed to start. So flew home, yeah, it's been an interesting time. But we're all healthy, and people are still reading it and seem to be enjoying it.
Actually, since you bring up the shutdown, y'all are publishing or just published an anthology. Is that correct? Could you tell us about that?
So we're publishing an anthology in a couple of weeks, June 16th, called Lockdown. Actually, I have a copy right here. These are finished copies just off press, but basically it's about a couple months ago, about 2 months ago, an author that I know approached me with the potential of doing essentially a charity anthology to try to raise money for the Book Industry National Foundation, or National Charity Think, which goes to support independent booksellers, especially ones that have been affected by the coronavirus, because there are a lot of bookstores that have closed or have fired or furloughed employees during all of this. So we thought it'd be really cool to essentially recruit some amazing authors to write brand new stories centered around the idea of a pandemic. It's not actually the coronavirus. We don't want to be that specific, but we thought it'd be cool to get a whole bunch of stories by some great authors, and then all the proceeds from the anthology go to support Think, or all these booksellers that have been affected by it. And comes out on June 16th in paperback and digital. We're doing a cool, what we call Noir at the Bar, which are usually these live readings that take place around the country at bars where authors read from their works in progress or new books that have come out. So we're doing a virtual Noir at the Bar and Crowdcast on June 19th to support with a bunch of the authors who wrote stories for it. So we thought it was a lot of fun to publish this anthology and hopefully raise a bit of money for booksellers who've been affected by the virus.
It's marvelous. So since you wear two different hats, both as author and as a publisher, let's talk a little bit about your work as an author. Mm-hmm. How did, tell us a little bit about publishing your first book, The Mark, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so The Mark came out, I think it was 2007 now. So I was I was like 27 years old when it came out and I just turned 40. So it was a while ago. It was incredible to me. I mean, I think I started writing The Mark when I was 24, 25. You know, I love reading sort of mysteries and thrillers and suspense novels, and The Mark was my attempt to do that, to write a sort of mystery or thriller, but do it from a different perspective. You know, because I was young when I began writing it, the main character, Henry Parker, is also sort of a young man. He's 24 years old. I felt a lot of the characters in thrillers and mysteries tended to be sort of older guys. They tend to be, you know, guys on their third divorces, they're paying for alimony and child support, and they have a drinking problem. And I thought it'd be more interesting to take a character who sort of didn't really have any baggage when you met him. Maybe he accrued some over the course of the series, but someone who's a little more maybe optimistic, maybe naively optimistic. But I thought that would add a different dimension to a genre that I think had sort of veered in one sort of very older and stodgier direction. So publishing was absolutely wonderful. It got optioned to be a movie. It got published in, you know, I think 15 different countries and different languages, you know, most of which I don't read, but it was a great experience.
Marvelous. Would you say that approaching your second novel changed? Did your approach change now that you've done it successfully once?
You know, the second book in the series, The Guilty, which is the second Henry Parker series, I would say my approach to those books was very similar because I wrote them when I was at working full-time, not for myself, but for another company. So I was on a bit of a hamster wheel where I was writing, you know, back to back to back to back. With this book, with Hideaway, it was very different because, first of all, I was running my own company. I was running Polis, so the buck always stopped with me. With, you know, when you're working full-time, but for someone else, most days you can go home and leave your work at home and leave your work at the office. I never had that chance because when you're running a company, when you go to bed, it's not because you're done with work. It's because you decided you just, you know, you can't keep your eyes open anymore. So I also, when this was published, when I was writing this, we just had our first daughter. So obviously I had a kid at that point. When I wrote the Henry Parker series, I did not have any kids. I don't think I was married at that point to my wife. So this one is very different. I was running a company. There wasn't enough time in the day because I was running it, also helping to raise an infant. And now that it's funny, it just came out a couple months ago, and now we have a second daughter. So it's very different in the sense that when this book came out, I had 2 young children, and when the Henry Parker's books came out, I was 27 years old, and kids were way off in my future. So very different from that perspective.
Very cool. So you said The Mark's been optioned to be a movie.
It was optioned to be a movie. It is no longer under option. That's the thing with option. Basically, what an option means is a company pays you X amount of money for essentially the right to make it. Sort of like it takes it off the table a little bit. So there's generally options last for a certain period of time, whether it's 12 months or 24 months. So the production company optioned it to be a movie. It did not end up getting made by the company, and the rights were reverted back to me. You know, it was a funny experience because I remember I had a phone call with the producer who optioned it, and he bought the book at an airport and loved it and contacted my agents. So I had this conversation with him, and he was like, "We're going to shoot." He wanted to shoot. Even though it's set partly between New York and St. Louis, we're going to shoot in Vancouver to save money on taxes. We're going to cast X author as Henry Parker. You know, he basically made it seem like the movie would be starting to shoot imminently. Now, of course, that was the last conversation I ever had with him, and I think that is not unfamiliar to people who work with Hollywood. Is that there's sort of a lot of talk and not a lot actually happens after the fact.
Sure. If you don't mind my asking, what did you do with your first advance? That's the dream when
I
you
mean,
publish.
it was 2006 when I signed the contract, so I probably used it to pay rent. Yeah, I mean, my first contract was not for a ton of money, so I'm pretty sure that I used it to pay rent or pay bills, and then I probably, treated myself to maybe like, a nice gift here or there. But I think when you're 27 and your advances, it was a decent amount of money. It was not
Yeah.
a life-changing amount of money.
Yeah.
So I can't say I went out and bought a yacht or a sports car. I think it was enough that I could pay rent, pay some bills, and then, maybe buy myself like, a GameCube or Xbox or whatever the PlayStation 2, whatever was out then.
Awesome. Some nice luxury to
Exactly.
feel
Luxury
good.
for a 26-year-old, whatever that means.
Yep. So since you've spoken to this just a minute, you've got a lot of demands on your time. Do you have any advice for how to manage that? Does writing energize you? Do you get do you get it spinning in your head where you can't sleep, or is it kind of exhausting?
I mean, I love it. I think when I'm working on a book that I really enjoy, the wheels are spinning constantly. So like the book right now, I finished up the second book in this series, which will be out in January. It's called A Stranger at the Door. It's the second book in Rachel Marin series. That book is, for all intents and purposes, done. It's just, working on proofs and copy edits. And I'm putting together material for what will hopefully be the third book in the series, which will come out in probably a year and a half. So, while I'm putting that together and working on potentially some other projects, like if I enjoy it, it's on my mind all the time. I literally, I keep a document in my writing folder where I just like jot down ideas, and the ideas come at all times. Literally, if I'm in the shower and I think of something, I text myself all this stuff so I don't forget it. So the wheels do tend to be constantly spinning. I'll get out of bed and write something down so I don't forget it the next morning. And I think that's the sign to me when a book is working, is if I can't get it out of my mind. And when I'm done for the night and close my computer, 10 minutes later, I open the Word document back up because I need to write something down.
Sure. Do you have any little concrete rituals or pieces of advice for people that are trying to craft a narrative from ideas? Do you have a word count you aim for every day, or?
I used to. I would say before kids, I definitely did. I'd say before kids, I tried to get around 1,500 to 2,000 words a day. Now with kids, it's literally just, it's more time than words. If I can, it's very rare that I can get 2,000 words in a day now, simply because I don't have enough time in the day. Nowadays, with the virus, both my wife and I work full time, and we have a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, and schools are closed, playgrounds are closed, parks are closed. We can't have play days, so we're homeschooling our kids, feeding our kids, taking care of our kids. It's very rare I get a couple hours of uninterrupted flow because they need dinner, they need changing, they need to play. So if I can get 500 good words, I'm happy. If I can stay up late and get more, I'm happy. For a finished book, for a mystery or thriller, it's usually between 70 to 90,000 words, give or take. Every genre sort of has different rules. I would try not to err too far on either side of that. If you write a full novel that's 50,000 words, that's probably gonna be too short. And if you write one that's 150, that's gonna be too long. But I would say, if you have the time, if you can get 1,000 words a day, in 90 days, you'll have a finished manuscript. And then obviously you have to edit it. But I'm always a fan of getting it all on paper. Even if those 90,000 words aren't very good, you can always edit them and make them better. But it's just getting the work down on the page is the first battle.
Gotcha. If you'd like to, tell us a little bit. You've written several books about Henry Parker. You mentioned your new heroine, Rachel. What are there differences in how you craft the stories around them, or is it difficult writing people that from opposite sex, gender, lifestyle?
Yeah, absolutely. With Henry, he was similar to me in the sense that I was in my early to mid 20s when I started writing the book, and he was in his early to mid 20s as a character. So I could sort of tap into my own life and joys and frustrations and foibles for that. I had to do research as far as he was a newspaper reporter and I was not. So I did research on that from that perspective. But the emotional honesty and core of Henry, I think I knew deep down because I was similar to the character. With Rachel, she's a single mother of 2 children who went through a horribly traumatic event, and that is nothing close to what I've been. I've had a relatively blessed life, I would say. So to write from her perspective, I knew I wanted to write a female character. I knew I wanted to write a mother and a single mother because I wanted her to be both strong and vulnerable. And I thought there was even though as a very hands-on father, I think there's a relationship between a biological mother, and their children that just the father won't understand. So I really wanted to get the character right. I wanted to understand from a female perspective, from a mother perspective. I talked to a lot of both mothers and single mothers to try to understand, you know, the emotions that you go through in dealing with that, so that I could try to write a character that, you know, that felt honest, even from a perspective of a guy who had nothing in common with her.
Okay. Sounds like some good research. I'm really looking forward to reading that because I'm a big Mickey Spillane old noir fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never seen a character like her. So I'm looking forward to reading that book.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of why I wanted to write that. I mean, I like writing characters in this genre that maybe aren't seen all that often, you know, less like sort of hard-boiled, you know. I think there's a lot out there sort of like, the guys who are leading tough, rough lives, and not a lot of younger people or maybe women who are balancing sort of both the detective work but then also a family, because, you know, they can't go out to get into bar fights at 3 a.m. They can't go on drunken benders because they have to go home and make dinner. And I thought that'd be a really interesting sort of dichotomy for a character.
Sure. I see we're getting some quite a few questions about publishing. So if you don't mind, let's switch hats and pivot over to Polis and being a publisher.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I'd like to ask is, what would you talk about what publishers expect from their authors? Possibly, and it might be the same question or a different question, but the merits of submitting directly to publishers versus submitting to literary agents.
Mm-hmm. So as far as what publishers expect from authors, I think number one is professionalism, and that goes into hitting your deadlines. So for authors that we have under contract, they all have deadlines for their manuscripts. They have deadlines for when they need to turn in edits and copy edits. So number one, you got to hit those, because when we sign up an author, we generally have a publication. If I sign up an author today, the book would probably come out next summer or fall. So we have a publication date in mind, and we have deadlines where we need to hit to make sure that the book comes out. We have time to promote it. We have time to sell it to bookstores and libraries. So I'd say professionalism in terms of your working with your publisher. You know, we do expect our authors to do as much of their own publicity as they're comfortable with, not in terms of spending money, but in terms of whether it's social media, whether it's using any networks they might have. The truth is, nobody's better selling a book than an author is, because they're the closest ones to it. They have, they might have networks who are interested in it. So I think that, we do look at our relationship with an author as very much a relationship. We want our authors to be happy. We want them to feel like we're doing a good job with them. And we have certain things that we expect from them too. And I think as long as we're on the same page and we're all openly communicating, I think it works out pretty well. As far as submitting goes, we do Polis Books. We do accept unsolicited submissions. That said, it's very rarely the best way to go about it. If you saw our submissions folder, it's like 50 a day. So we don't have the time to read everything that comes in, because if we took that time, we wouldn't have any time to actually work on the business. So the majority of our authors come from literary agents. Generally, literary agents work as a bit of a filter. They only take on books they think can sell, that are of a certain quality, a certain commercialism. Not to say that good stuff doesn't wind up in the submission pile, but if you're getting 50 submissions a day, it's impossible to sort of weed through that a little bit. So I always tend to suggest an author tries to get a literary agent before they submit directly. First of all, an agent's going to know where to submit to. I can't, of the 50 submissions I get per day, I can't tell you how many of those are just not a good fit for publishing us because people don't do the research. People submit poetry to us. They submit children's picture books to us. And they submit graphic novels to us, and we don't publish any of that. So authors a lot of times don't take the proper time to submit to publishers that are a good fit for them, and literary agents do that. They know what publishers to submit to, they know what agents to submit to, they know what, they might have some editorial feedback for your book. So I do tend to suggest authors try to submit to literary agents before going the direct to publisher route.
Okay. Considering the sale of Simon & Schuster, where do you see legacy publishing heading in the next 5 years? Probably rolled up with how iPad and Kindle have impacted the publishing business. Do you sell more books in print or electronically? Do you want to? Because you,
I think those are two very, very different questions.
Okay, well, let's just start with the where do you see legacy publishing in the next 5 years?
Well, right now it's the big five. Depending on where Simon & Schuster sells, it could be the big four within the next year. I think these big media companies like Comcast or when Penguin got sold to Random House, I think that was a Holtzbrink, I think, or Pearson. When Penguin got sold to Random House, a lot of these larger media conglomerates look at the book publishing industry, and the truth is book publishing is very low. It's much lower margin than, say, television or film or some of these other industries. So I think when Simon & Schuster went up for sale, they basically said, Comcast said, hey, this is not like a core business for us, even though it's $1 billion company. The margins are relatively low. I do think legacy publishing will still exist. Books still, it's still a $5 billion a year industry, give or take. But the ability to go outside of legacy publishing is one thing that has really opened up over the last, 10 years or so. And I think that can kind of segue maybe into ebooks, in that there's a little bit more of a meritocracy when it comes to ebooks as opposed to legacy publishing and print publishing, which is so much dependent on where a book is in stores. You walk into, say, a Barnes & Noble, when you see a book on the front of the table, that's not an accident. The publisher pays a lot of money for the book to get on the front of the table. Whereas with ebooks, you don't really have that sort of front of the table advertising, I guess. So I do think legacy publishing will still exist. I do think the last 10 years have shown there are a lot of other options for both publishers and authors outside of that. Polis Books is an independent publisher. We don't have a fraction of the resources that Simon & Schuster does. So we have to be a lot more creative and flexible when it comes to how we promote our books, because we can't buy the step ladders at Barnes & Noble which cost $100,000 or something like that. We have to be a lot more creative. So I do think there are a lot of opportunities for publishers and authors outside of legacy. But at the same time, I don't think the legacies are necessarily going anywhere. They certainly might merge. The big five might become the big four and might keep dwindling and dwindling. But there is still an appetite for print books, and I'm glad for that because I love them.
Sure, me too. Okay, best case, perfect example. If you got, what would a perfectly submitted manuscript, like how would you prefer to receive that? What are there any guidelines that should be followed to help submit?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have our submission guidelines on our website, and we basically detail what we want. I think it's, we expect a professional query letter, and then I think it's the first 3 chapters of a book. And that's another thing when I say authors need to do the research, what we ask for might be different than what a literary agent asks for. They might ask for the first 50 pages, the first 5 pages. And I find a lot of authors just sort of blanket everybody with the exact same stuff. And listen, when I say you ask what is a good author relationship, if I see an author that, number one, isn't following our submission guidelines, that says to me they're not really interested in me. They're just sort of, they're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. I want to see if someone wants to work with me, why do they want to work with us? So, follow the guidelines depending on where you're submitting. A query letter should be professional. And when I say that, there's generally a format for query where you give a description of the book. It should read almost like flap copy. If you go to a bookstore and read the jacket copy or read the back of the book, it should read like that, where it's, a couple paragraphs of description. It should be sort of mysterious, want you to read more. And then your qualifications. What have you published before? What have you written before? why are you uniquely qualified to write this book? And, you know, a lot of people are first-time writers and they may not have written anything before, which is absolutely fine. But, you know, I see a lot of people, a lot of queries that come in, and the first thing it says is, listen, you know, my name is Jim. I've written a book. My wife loves it. I think it's going to be bigger than Harry Potter. And that's just a ridiculous way to start a query letter. So I look for professionalism. I look for people that know their audience. If somebody says, you know, gives a good description of the book and says, my book will appeal to the fans of Harlan Coben or Dan Brown, it's a international thriller, then I know who they think, I know that they know who their audience is. And that says to me, they've written a book with an audience in mind. That says a lot. So, you know, professional query letter, know who your audience is. And I would say just, you know, read the submission guidelines depending on where you're submitting to and follow those.
Okay. I have a question. Can an author get by using just his initials? So do you have any thoughts on using your initials or a nom de plume or any pseudonym?
I think J.K. Rowling would say that using initials are absolutely fine. Yeah, there are generally no issues with that. You know, I don't think, you know, as long as the person, your name can be pronounced or spelled, I don't think there's any issues with that whatsoever. I know a lot of authors that go by their initials, you know, JK or NB or what have you. I think it does come down in the end to the book. Obviously, if you want to use that, you're not going to get turned down or even anything like that just for using initials.
Sure. I'm, you know, noticing the Hideaway covered beside you. How much input does the author have into selecting cover art, or as a publisher, how do you select cover art?
So it's sort of two different things. So, so Hideaway was published by Thomas & Mercer, which is a division of Amazon. When they acquired the book, I essentially got an author questionnaire, and where I basically talked about, you know, sort of similar to what we do actually, but it's about, you know, who we are, who we think our audience is, tones of the book, themes, who the main characters are. And I was able to give essentially some feedback as far as like, what are some settings or images or other book covers I like that are similar to mine. Then once I did that, I'd say a couple months later, they sent over some essentially comp covers, which sort of took some of my ideas, but then went in another direction. And then I was able to give feedback on that. So I would say in the end, the publisher very much did their own thing. And I love the cover so much. The amount of detail that went into this, really, you can't really see it on Zoom, but they put a tremendous amount of effort into the little details in this cover. I was able to give feedback on those comp covers, like maybe changing the color or maybe changing the font a little bit. But they essentially did their job and did it very well. And we do a very similar thing when we acquire a book. We send our authors a questionnaire. We say, you know, what are some other book covers you like? Who do you see this book appealing to? We always, when we do a cover, we give our designers a briefing, which is essentially, here's what the book is, here's the tone, here's some other authors or books we like that are sort of comparable to it. And then they come back with something and we sort of go from there. Maybe it's in the right direction, maybe it's not. We always try to get feedback from authors because we want them to love our covers. We want them to promote their covers. And we want them to be happy with sort of how the book comes out, both, you know, inside and out.
Okay. Do you have any advice on finding a literary agent?
So I think the best resource for an aspiring author is there's a website called publishersmarketplace.com. And I think it's like $20 for a 1 month subscription. It's the best resource out there because it's essentially a database that catalogs every publishing deal, I think, over the last 15 to 20 years. So if you're writing science fiction, you can log on and filter literally hundreds of agents who represent science fiction, represent authors that you like or authors that you are comparable to you. And that's the best resource there is to me, because you should always target agents who represent the genre that you're writing. And I mean, I know a lot of agents, and a lot of them will say, like, listen, I get a ton of these submissions for romance novels, but I've never represented a romance novel. A lot of authors will just literally, like I said, throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks, but you're much better off directly targeting agents who represent works that are comparable to what you're writing. And I think publishersmarketplace.com is the best resource for that, because you can filter out dozens, if not hundreds, of agents who represent works in the same vein as yours.
Okay. to take things back a little bit, and on a personal level, like when you started out at Wesleyan as an English major, did you anticipate at that time going into publishing? Were you wanting to be an editor when you grew up? Did you want to be an editor, an author, and a publisher? Like what?
No, I mean, funny enough, I think when I went to Wesleyan, I wanted to get into film. Actually, I loved the film department there. Jeannie Basinger was the chair. I think it was as I went along, just my love for books grew, and by the time I graduated, I was already reaching out to try to learn more about the industry. I got an internship working at a literary agency out of college before my first full-time job, and just to learn the industry more. So I definitely didn't go to Wesleyan with the expectation of getting into publishing or writing books. My freshman year, I hadn't written a book. But I really think it's sort of, as most people do in college, they sort of start to cement what they do want to do and what they want to be. And a lot of people who go to both Wesleyan or college in general, they might get there thinking they want to do one thing. By the time they graduate, it's something completely different.
Sure. Were there any, obviously you joined Psi Upsilon at that time. Were there any sort of contemporaries that you've stayed in touch with, or that you've encountered in a professional manner since?
Yeah, I mean, one of my brothers at Psi was the best man at my wedding. I still keep in touch with a lot of them. Yeah, I mean, that was probably the best part of it, is just friends who, you keep in touch with throughout life. And, we certainly do go our own ways to some extent, especially once people start having families and moving off. You can't get together for drinks quite as often, but you're always, I'm in, fantasy baseball and football leagues with a few of them. It's, you find ways to sort of stay in touch with anybody since, the days of, drinking and partying and just kind of hanging out around a pool table aren't really possible anymore with little ones. But, you meet people that you do stay in touch with the rest of your life.
Yeah. Or, you volunteer your time to talk about publishing and share your expertise.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, listen, I got into publishing. I had a lot of help. I knew nothing about the industry. I knew nothing about writing. I knew nothing about publishing. And how I got into the industry was I read the acknowledgement section in a lot of books that I enjoyed. And I literally cold emailed all the editors. I would find in the acknowledgement section, the author would thank their editor. And I would email the editor and say, hey, I just read this book. I really enjoyed it. You're listed as the editor. I know you might not have any jobs open, can I pick your brain up for 15 minutes about the industry? And almost to a T, they all agreed. It was just their kindness and generosity to share their knowledge with me. And how I got my first job was I had an informational interview with an editor at Little Brown. I read a book called Live from Saturday Night, which was an oral history of Saturday Night Live, which I absolutely loved. I found the editor's name in the acknowledgement section, emailed him. He agreed to just let me ask him some questions. And then a few months later, he said, hey, I have a friend who's got a job opening at his company. Can I refer you? And that's how I got my first job. So any chance I have to sort of pay that forward, I'll do it.
Marvelous. We did have a clarification on the question about initials. The anonymous attendee was asking, for example, if they're published as just initials, like KPB. Instead of
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Okay.
I think if there's not I guess if you're writing sort of a really esoteric meta book, maybe, but if you're trying to write sort of more of a mainstream book and there's no first or last name, I think that's probably not going to work in your favor. So I'd say unless you have like a really specific reason for doing that, something really personal, really important, you're better off having some sort of, whether it's first or last name, something identifiable. I think people, if you do just initial, people might think you're a moving company.
Right. Okay. For an unpublished author, is there value drawback to self-publishing?
Is there value drawback?
Is there a value or a drawback to self-publishing? Like if someone's been trying to submit to publishing houses or agents and is not having as much luck,
right?
What would you say about going the self-publishing route as a first-time author?
There can be both pros and cons to doing that. The pro is that, one of the things about the advent of the Kindle and iPad and self-publishing and print on demand is that you can get your book out there. The con is that how are people ever going to find out about it? Having a page on Amazon does not mean people buy it. How are you going to promote the book? How are you going to publicize the book? And this is not speaking to anybody in particular because I don't know what these people have written, but why is your book getting turned down? Is it possible that it's not the right book? Is it possible you need to hone your craft more? One of the downsides I would say is that a lot of people, like I wrote a book before I wrote The Mark that I tried to get published and did not get published because nobody wanted to buy it. No editors wanted to buy it. And that failure led me to get better at my craft. And I'm very thankful now that book got turned down because my next book was much better. So I think you really need to think, like, is this book getting turned down because it's really a work of genius and nobody understands it? Or is it like, hey, if I wrote another book or another book after that, I'm going to get much better and have a better shot at kind of breaking out. I think a lot of people look at self-publishing as, hey, I'm going to put my book out there in Kindle and sell 1 million copies. And that's absolutely not the case whatsoever. People need to find your book. You are literally, you're a small fish swimming in an ocean with 1 million other small fishes. So unless you have sort of incredible platform on social media or another way to get the word out, you are essentially taking on the work of running your own small business with nowhere near the resources of publishers or other authors. So I think you need to think long and hard about why you're doing it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, think about why you're doing it. Would you benefit from more work on your craft? And if you do decide to do it, how are you going to spread the word? How are people going to find out about it, and what's going to make them buy it?
All right. Let me ask you, what's next? What have you got in the hopper, either as an author or as a publisher?
So I'm just finishing up the final edits on the second book in the Rachel Marin series. It's called A Stranger at the Door, and it'll be out in January. Hopefully, depending on the virus situation, I'd love to get out on the road and go back to some bookstores. As far as Polis Books goes, we had to postpone a few books on our list because of the virus, because bookstores are, not really functioning fully these days. But we have a lot of great books. We have this anthology coming out in June. Then we have a lot of great books coming up into the late summer and fall. If you go to polisbooks.com, you can see some of the hundreds and dozens of books that we've published that are available in print and digital. So I'd say we have 10 or so books scheduled to be published by the end of the year. The next Rachel Marin book comes out in January, and I'm really excited to see how folks react to that. And then hopefully, I love this series and I love this character, and hopefully I'll get a chance to do more, and then maybe even something totally different.
Since we're coming up on 45 minutes, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to go ahead and...
I can hear my kids screaming in the other rooms.
Oh. Well, I want to be respectful of their time as well. I'm going to go ahead and promote Alexander Senchek, who is our president and chair of the Psi Upsilon Foundation, just so he can say thank you and say a few words.
So, Jason, I want to ask you one thing, if I may. May I close you out on one question? Mm-hmm. What I love about your story is how you've had a couple of turns, and you've really changed your focus or added to your focus. And I'm just wondering if there's anything you thought you knew when you started out on this journey that you have learned otherwise this many years later.
I would say, there's always enough time in the day. That might sound simple, but when I'm at a conference and people will ask, about writing and advice and things like that, and I'll hear somebody say, I don't have time to write. And I'll say, like, okay, what do you do for a living? And it's like, okay, well, I have 2 kids in college and I work a full-time job. And I'm like, That's fantastic. I wrote 5 books doing that. You find time. If you have kids in college, great. You don't have to deal with them. They're feeding themselves and they're alive and you can change any diapers. But I read John Grisham, when he wrote, I think, A Time to Kill. He was working as a full-time lawyer. He woke up at 4 a.m. and wrote before court. So I think granted, my time is much more stretched now than it used to be with 2 toddlers, and given the situation, we don't have childcare or school to put them in. But you know, it's miraculous how much you can squeeze into a day. And I think for a lot of people who, you know, if it might mean that you have to sacrifice a TV show that you love, or meeting the guys for drinks as often as you used to, or whatever bowling league or softball league you're in. Because the truth is, like, writing is and publishing is a really hard industry. It's hard to get into it. It's hard to break out in. It's a very low margin industry. You can do very well in it, but you have to have a really thick skin and you have to work your ass off. So I would say, you know, one thing I didn't know is that just how much you can squeeze into a day, literally minute by minute. Because there are times when my free time is literally minute to minute. And, you know, Jonathan asked me how many words I write in a day, and sometimes it's 200 words because I've had literally no more than 10 minutes of free time, but I use those 10 minutes. So if you're struggling, like, use every minute you have, because sometimes that's all you're going to get.
Well, I'm just going to ask you this one last thing, because you like myself and some others, you know, we were not around during the age of the typewriter. And I just wonder about how you think technology may shift the art of writing, if it has at all in your career, and where you see it. I just have to ask that question.
It certainly shifted the publishing industry. I mean, you know, when the Kindle came out, it changed everything. It changed the way books are published. It changed revenue models. It changed the way authors work. And it changed, you know, I think 15 years ago, if somebody self-published, it was a black mark against them. It was really sort of looked down upon. If you self-published, it was because you couldn't get published. There were a few people who did it and made it work, and then, you know, got big movie deals or big publishing deals, but it was sort of, you know, that was that was a very rare exception. Nowadays, self-publishing can work. There's not really as much of a stigma. A lot of people self-publish and do it very, very well, and that's because of ebooks and technology. So this changing technology has enabled a lot of authors to find success in ways they might not have before. It's changed how publishers publish, and that digital is very much, you have to promote digital and print books completely differently. So we've had to change and adapt to that. It's changed everything, but at the same time, it's opened up a lot of doors that I think have made the industry better. As far as the art of writing goes, I think the art doesn't change. I think it enables people to potentially do more and find different audiences.
It's fascinating. And it probably will change a host more based on current events. I can only imagine. So, so I want to personally thank you, though, Jason. I was riveted. I mean, literally, really interested by this. I'm not a writer myself, but you know, I think that what you do, and it is a fascinating industry that's been around for a very long time and continues to amaze me at what it produces. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And,
thanks for having me. I'm gonna go tell my kids that I'm gonna say Daddy riveted people, and they're not
riveted people. Yes, please do. And to all our audience, and to Jonathan, thank you for everything. You all are making it. You know, you're making this a fun moment in this quarantine time. And I hope that you'll come back and join us for some future events.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to switch over to our upcoming speakers. Thank you again, Jason. It's been absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen here just to show who we've got coming up. The speaker series happens about every 2 weeks. Right now, because we can't meet in person. Our next speakers will be coming up in June, not July, my apologies. We've got a fireside chat June 18th with Dr. Barbara Hendry, who is a Kappa 80 Odin. She is the director for North America for the UN Environmental Program. And then Thursday, June 25th, we're starting our summer hospitality season series, which is 3 speakers. One will talk about wine, 1 beer, and 1 distilling. They're all Psi-Us who own these companies. So in June, we'll be speaking with Cushing Donovan, who's a Gamma from Amherst. and the Director of Marketing for Donnellan Family Wines. So please check us out on psiu.org. You can see more, you'll be able to see this video and videos from our past speaker series. And we've got a Psi Upsilon Professional Network on LinkedIn, where you can meet various people who attended and presented during the speaker series. And with that, good night and have a great time. And thank you for participating in the Psi U speaker series.
Thanks, everyone.